Good evening, TheoTrade. This is Corey Resloom, and you're watching the Theo Nightly Video for an eventful 26th of April here in 2022. Let's not waste any time with this. The NASDAQ is off after hours 5%. That includes today's session, and you're looking at a major culprit, which is Google or Alphabet. Shares traded at the end of the session. We'll take a look at this. This is our earnings-based expected move logic. This is going to be a straddle pricing for Google, and that's going to be your after hours implied volatility. That's going to give you, all intents and purposes, an expected move for the earnings around about 2,400, pushing that up or down. That level is 2,200 on the downside or about 2,582 on the upside. Google missed, or at least the shares are plunging. Google is trading as of this video at a low just about to that earnings-based expected move. And again, that was a lower. That was roughly speaking 185. That's what I projected. And that's what those shares are trading at the moment. So that will be the focal point of Wednesday's session as we go into it. But not only Google, there is a little bit of action after hours in another big monster of tech, and it's Microsoft. So similar logic for Microsoft. Don't have a straddle price, but the expected move is roughly 30 up or down. Pushing that into the close price was a little bit under that, about 20, a little bit earlier. Takes about 290 per share from Microsoft, or to the downside of 250. Where are shares trading? 267. Not much different, at least after hours. And as you look, there will be news reports. So as we're going through this at the end of the session, there is the news earnings, just for the sake of the video, just a 10-minute video here. I won't detail the earnings, but that's where you'll take a look at what the earnings were, projected revenue, earnings per share, and etc. And same is true for Google or Alphabet. And you can also take a look at our Analyze tab, and this will be the earnings. Earnings that isn't quite ready yet in terms of the actual and Wall Street estimate, but that'll be updated as soon as Thinkorswim gets a chance to do that after the hours and after the earnings. So you'll have the news report right here. You'll have the earnings and what the pricings were. But what we're looking at the moment is additional selling in the NASDAQ. So let's start right there. Other stocks included, we'll come to those momentarily, but the big news, and probably what we'll hear about in the any news reports you might hear or things you're looking at with us here in TheoTrade or Thinkorswim, is going to be the sell-off in the NASDAQ. And yes, it is concentrated in the most part to the NASDAQ, but a 5% decline in the NASDAQ, while large. The S&P is down 3.5% in today's session. That's your S&P futures. The Dow mini futures stayed well bid, and they're only down 2.5%. And the Russell, the small cap index, is down 3.5%. Let's pinpoint some of these developments. In the NASDAQ 100, this is our Market Watch and Heat Map tab. You can see by the market capitalization, the bigger the box, the bigger the market cap. So Microsoft being not the leader, but right there with Apple. Apple is $2.5 trillion. Microsoft is right at that 2 trillion mark. And we'll just see Google. It doesn't count twice, just one. 1.5 trillion. Of course, Amazon reports a little bit later in the week, and we'll talk about that as we get there. So does Apple. Apple and Amazon, big market cap names. So here on the 26th of April, that is a big deal, and we are paying attention very closely to the aftermarket hours and the after trading and how the markets shape up on Wednesday. But we aren't done with earnings because, again, Apple and Amazon and many, many other names do have earnings, and they are big. But a stock that is on the radar, which was the biggest, one of the biggest decliners, was the biggest in the S&P, behind GE, General Electric, and that's an earnings play as well, 10% off for GE shares. Tesla was down 12%, and it lost that $1 trillion market cap level. So Tesla shares themselves are off in today's session 12%. So we will be watching that in tomorrow's session. So let's take a pinpoint look at the daily charts. Now, not to be outdone, NVIDIA was off 5.6%. Nike, a retail name, was off about 6%. There is Netflix, which continues its earnings-based and post-earnings slide to the downside, and that lost the 200 per share level. Just a round number reference. Boeing has earnings as well, and it continues this daily chart downtrend. Broadcom, PayPal, and we can see many other names were off 3 or 4% in today's session. So back to the S&P, not a lot of bright spots, but there was a small one, and it is in the energy sector, with crude oil at one point being up about 5%. It ended the session up 3%. VIX volatility index will take a look at it spiking back to the 34 print. Of course, VIX futures as well. The bond market did rally, and we were discussing that with Don this morning about how the risk off or protective defensive plays were coming into focus, and they continue after hours because money is rotating into the bond market here as seen through the tradable ETF, TLT, and that is traded up from the 119 per share to currently about 123. ZN is going to be our 10-year Treasury note, and that got itself a bounce as well. That is your intraday chart. That's into the close, so bonds remain well bid into the close as equities sell off. And the 30-year bond made new lows and then continues its bounce as well. On the flip side, we'll take a look at the TNX, the Treasury yield, and that just spiked shy of that 30. When it says 30, it says 3%. When it says 20, it means 2%. And the Treasury yield continued to spike and then has retraced a little bit as bond prices strengthened these last few trading sessions. In the sector strength, just looking at sector performance, financials were down 2.5%. Technology was down just about 4%. And again, there is your consumer discretionary. That's where Tesla is going to be. And that helped that index, or at least push the index, influence the index to be a little weaker than some of the other technology shares. Tesla and Amazon are not counted as even though we call them here at TheoTrade a monster of tech, they're technology stocks, but they actually fall under retail or consumer discretionary. So that will affect if you have trades or positions into XLY, or if you're defensively hedged or playing off in different diversifications. XLY is retail or discretionary, and some of the big names there, you can see all the products. There's Nike was a big loser in today's session, Home Depot, McDonald's, and others. But technology sector, XLK, that's where you'll see the most of your familiar names, which include NVIDIA, Microsoft, Apple, and others. So big decliners on today's sessions are here, focused at the top, while the one little spot of green, and while we're here, we'll take a look at the Russell. There it is. It's the energy sector, and not a lot to write home about right there. Healthcare was off. Everything was off in today's session, and we'll just pick that up with our stocks that are making new 52-week lows. So again, 26th of April here, a lot to cover, short time to cover it. Let's just pinpoint where the weakness is coming from in stocks that continue downtrending and getting weaker. The thought process here is if something is weak and downtrending and making new lows, it tends to continue or stay weak and continue making new price lows. That's going to give rise to bearish or short sell type trades in the direction of the downtrend. Some of the stocks, as I rate by market cap, would be Facebook, JP Morgan, Walt Disney, Verizon, Adobe, Salesforce.com. Then we'll talk about Boeing. There's PayPal, Applied Material, and there is GE. Not a stock you'd be familiar with, or at least trading very actively, but it is worth noting, and I mean that just by the share price and the volatility in GE, and not what you'd expect, at least not anywhere near something like a Tesla or Amazon or monster of tech. But nonetheless, GE has registered new 52-week lows. Let's actually pull this over to the weekly chart so we can get a comparison. And that's just all I mean about GE. It's a stock that for the last few years has traded with a low of about 55 and a high 115. That is a big range, but big range nonetheless. Compare that with something like Costco, which is traded from the 150 all the way to 600. Not to knock on GE, but it's a consistent stock. Now outside of that, we'll take a look just down the list. Facebook continues its sell-off in its downtrend, and that is a new 52-week low. We highlighted that from last week's video. That low has not been seen since about the pandemic lows of 2020. Beyond that is a financial company, JP Morgan. Not necessarily as dramatic a sell-off, but it's about a 50% decline from that most recent 80 to 170, trading now about 120. And that does continue a daily chart downtrend. Again, for trade logic and trade setups, we would want to sell short pullbacks or retracements into falling moving averages or falling trend lines. And that can be done with the put spreads or put type positions on the way down when the market rallies and retraces up. And that can be seen again just a little bit here in GE. That continues a downtrend as well. But then Disney, and for the sake of the video quickly, just looking at the weekly chart here and the continued daily chart on the right, and then Verizon. So that's not a stock making significant new 52-week lows, but new 52-week lows it is, and that's what the scan is picking up. And if you want to replicate the scan, it is in load scan query, it's a public scan, and that is stocks making new yearly lows here in Thinkorswim, and you'll separate that into stocks in the S&P 500. So again, a lot to cover. We'll have you covered in tomorrow's session and beyond, but earnings are in full swing. NASDAQ is off 5%, and we see that weekly chart losing the 13,000 level. So technology is on the way down. It is marching us the way lower, but the S&P right there with it, as is the Dow and the small cap Russell 2000. As always, be careful and safe. This is Corey Rosenblum with tonight's Theo video update for April 26th, 2022.